Greetings, one and all. This is the Magnificent Jack Strange, aka Shenandoah C. That's me, and I'm about to do a commentary and walkthrough of one of my favorite Edward D. Wood Jr. films, which was coincidentally his first, at least finished, theatrical film by the name of Glen or Glenda, 1953, courtesy of, I think, the Cult Cinema Classics channel via YouTube. Now, there's going to be some coming attractions and trailers in between here that I'll have to stop the recording for and try to, mute my microphone when they appear, when and if they appear. But in fact, I'm going to try to keep the movie on a lower volume in general so that you can hear my insight and commentary as the film progresses. Now, this is a film produced by George Weiss, who, unlike the manner he's depicted in the Tim Burton film, actually got along pretty well, had a very good relationship with Edward D. Wood Jr. And in fact, in the book A Nightmare of Ecstasy by Rudolph Gray, there's very little, there's almost nothing bad he has to say about Ed Wood. I think he was a nice young Jewish man who, according to Wikipedia, is apparently still alive to this day because it doesn't show a death date. Now, right here we're in the opening credits. They actually changed the title. The original title was I Changed My Sex, and I think there's another title or so that was released on the original VHS for those of you who are big-time collectors out there. These Edward D. Wood Jr. films were released widely by, right now we got the Lassie music on the intro of the film. And this is one of my favorite things about Glen or Glenda is the Lassie music on the intro. I call it Lassie music. I don't know exactly where he gets the music from, but I think it's pretty cool. At the start, we have this note, and we're actually going to freeze on it here as I was interrupting my narrative to try to discuss what was going on. In the making of this film, which deals with a strange and curious subject, no punches have been pulled, no easy way out has been taken. Many of the smaller parts are portrayed by persons who actually are, in real life, the character they portray on the screen. This is a picture of stark realism, taking no sides but giving you the facts, all the facts as they are today. You are society, judge ye not. Those are the words of Edward D. Wood Jr. with regards to his highly personal biopic Glen or Glenda, which, like I said, this was his original biopic, written and directed and produced by himself. And many of the scenes that you will see in this film were recreated by Johnny Depp in the Tim Burton movie, with Depp as the Ed Wood character. Now, I have this on freeze frames to pause the commentary for a moment. What I was going to tell you is a number of these films have been faithfully reproduced and released by Wade Williams, who is a big fan of Edward D. Wood Jr., although some collectors are a little picky about the exact titles and trying to get their hands on the earliest release of a VHS format. VHS has become a new collector's item. I hate it becoming a collector's item because it means that they're more expensive than they ever were before, and that sucks. People don't like to watch them nearly as much. They're just going to stick them on a shelf and charge $1,000 for whatever the hell they have. But if you make a buck off of it, I guess more power to you. For me and myself as concerned, I hope for a return of the VHS format so that we can enjoy watching a movie that you just pop in and don't have to, streamline or watch get glitchy or, as are prone to like the streaming services or the DVD Blu-ray formats. VHS is a very fine viewing product. You just rewind. I don't know. That rewinding is the worst thing about it, but who cares? Anyway. I just wanted to make that special shout out to Wade Williams before I progress on this commentary. And right now we are at the special note on the screen which lays out the public service message aspect of this film. This is almost kind of like one of the early special programs. Like if you ever watch different Strokes and so on, where they have a message. This is Wood's film that has a message. And as you'll notice later on in his film career, there'll be a number of other messages that he addresses. So in this case, it's the issue of transvestism, changing one's sex, and homosexuality, and a lot of other, personal sexuality attributes. Later on, he'll get into the issue of UFOs, gangsters, sexual addictions, and all sorts of other topics that are usually depicted in this Cyto documentary drama. And of course, as I have a lot to discuss and don't want to get hung up on the scenes, I'm going to have to be stopping or doing whatever this video shows me to do. Anyway, let's progress with watching the movie and hope for the very best here. Let's just get on with the production and the show. So as I say, I really like the Lassie music in this. It hangs on the credit and note sequence rather long so that you can definitely read and portray it. We start in with Bela Lugosi, actor Bela Lugosi, in what was more or less the character and role of God. Officially, he's credited as the mad scientist, and he's about to talk here, so I think I might have to unmute for a moment or two. And startling, perhaps because they are new, but many are not new in the realm of the ages. Anyway, cut to commercial. I could actually see some of these lines through the wonderful little captions on the film, so maybe I don't need to actually run the audio while I'm watching it. Lugosi didn't particularly want to do this movie, as you may imagine from the strange content of it. Like the sex change operation is not something that is dealt with in any of his previous horror films. But this is actually one of his greatest roles, not just for the mere power of it, because although he's credited as a scientist, and also right here, he's about to pour the liquid in the vial that explodes, and he's holding it as far away from him as he can because it literally went off and he was scared of it, I think. Or maybe I'm thinking of a different scene, perhaps. I don't know. There was an odd scene where he's holding this vial as... Oh, right here, baby. Is it coming up? This is going to smoke, and he's going to hold it as far away from himself as he can. This was like one of the goofs and funny things that happened in the Ed Wood movies, and I'm not standing near that. One of them burned me on the Return of Shamro. Yeah, he's holding as far as he can. It's going to pour in, and then it's going to smoke. Woo! Lugosi's trying. He's a very old man. He's been in the war and everything. But he doesn't want to go near that little concoction right there. I think there's another clip that's even more severe than that. But I love this character where he's sort of like the grand master of all things, just quietly working about in his laboratory, whatever the hell goes on, and the scenery and atmosphere is perfect, and you have no idea that this is a movie about Christine Jorgensen, although you're about to find out. This is some of the best Bela Lugosi dialogue I've also heard in any of his movies. I say this as a compliment to Ed Wood's writing, and as well as to one of Lugosi's last great audio performances, because as he got older and weaker, this is him when he was relatively youthful, and you can see his little round head, and his lines come out just right. He appears a little more haggard in the next film, Bride of the Monster, whereas right now he's about to give one of my favorite lines. And one is right because he does wrong. These captions are off. They can't keep up with Lugosi's Hungarian accent. And then here you get the pull the strings line. Dance to that. I never figured out what that means. He basically, essentially, since Ed Wood was a loose student of Greek mythology, the silver strings are what control your soul. So when the silver string parts, that means that you die. And so he is more or less God controlling the silver strings. and when he sees someone that he doesn't like, he pulls the strings, pull the string on them, kill them, get them out of here. That what one is created for. And then this is a new life is born. Someone dies, a new life is born. Anyway, not a whole lot to go over at the moment. But pretty soon we're going to see the death of a transvestite, which actually became one of Ed Wood's famous pulp novel titles. And in this case, you could almost put this at the end of that book, although the Ed Wood book is actually a continuation of the character of Glen from Glen or Glenda, or at least it has the same name. And apparently Glen takes on a rather dark tone after the film, where he becomes a mafia hitman and he's sentenced to death row. Now, up here is actor Lyle Talbot, who was a longtime collaborator with Ed Wood, but somehow, despite even starring in the film Glen or Glenda, and which deals specifically with transvestites, Lyle Talbot himself did not know that Wood was a transvestite. So at one point he had him over to his house, and Wood apparently grabbed his wife's negligee and sweater and pulled it all out of proportion and came out in the room dressed up like a woman, and the wife was kind of like laughing like, is this a joke? And then his son saw it, and then as soon as they realized it wasn't quite a joke, he threw Wood out of his home. And to my knowledge, I don't know if they really stopped working together as he may imply, because Talbot still made an appearance in Plan 9 from Outer Space, so I don't know when this falling out may have occurred. But it was a major event in the relationship between Ed Wood and Lyle Talbot. Lyle Talbot, who just, was a professional actor, enjoyed making money, and he gave his same dedication to each role he was given, and very nice performance here in the Glen or Glenda film. Now, speaking with him now is actor Timothy Farrell, who is a favorite actor among the George Weiss films, and he gives a brilliant performance as the narrator of the dialogue in Ed Wood's script. A very straightforward delivery of sometimes very campy and flamboyant words. Wood was very proud of his words, but he could take them or leave them as needed depending on the requests or needs of the production. He was ready to change instantly for as much as he put into everything. Now we got a stupid commercial because we can't watch a simple public domain film on YouTube without getting into an ad, but we're going to skip that, go right back to the action with Timothy Farrell, looking a little bit like a 50s era Edgar Allan Poe. In fact, he would have made a very fine Edgar Allan Poe if he had changed his hair just somewhat slightly. So this is Timothy Farrell as the psychiatrist and the all-knower. Really, there's almost no need to have the Bela Lugosi character in the movie once you have the Farrell character narrating all the action, but I suppose the Farrell character is meant to narrate the scientific aspects or pseudoscientific aspects of this docudrama versus Bela Lugosi, who's supposed to lend us some spiritual perspective and how we may perceive this from beyond this world and the afterlife. So Timothy Farrell here is laying down the quote-unquote science of the film that Mr. Edward D. Wood Jr. has prescribed to us, all in favor of course, the transvestite life. This film is kind of about how a transvestite can live a normal life, or how a transvestite feels. Now, even though transvestism is now a more popular topic among, like the new, four-letter mafia community and so forth, back then it was, Wood in this film is trying very hard to distance himself from the homosexual community. So in this story, he's actually an all-American heterosexual transvestite, which to some extent is what Ed Wood actually was, because he liked women. And he's trying to say that a transvestite is not necessarily a homosexual, and to some degree it's perfectly normal for men to want to wear women's clothing because it makes them feel closer to them. So in this bizarre and unusual dialogue, explaining a very sensitive topic that was rather close to his heart. I'm not saying it's wrong even, because this film is coming from someone who is in fact a transvestite, but it comes off somewhat hilarious in the serious manner of how this is being discussed. It's almost like when Clinton and George W. Bush or what do you call it? What's that other guy? Bob Dole. We're talking about crack babies during a presidential debate. You know, these are shocking terms if you're not everyday familiar with them. And Ed Wood lays them out, I think, as best as he can, while being perhaps a scientific amateur, or how you say, outsider, however you take it as you will. He's not necessarily a medical expert, but he's laying it down as he can best describe it to you in this film. So truly, what Ed Wood claimed to be the case for why he was most qualified to direct this film was because he was in fact a transvestite. So as the legend and story has it, he went up to George Weiss and said, "I'm the most qualified man to direct this because I am in fact a transvestite." And that's what he went to George Weiss with. Now, in the film, the Tim Burton movie, George Weiss is famously depicted by Mike Starr, and he's basically meant to be a cutout and stereotype of a sleazy Hollywood producer from any age. In this case, representative of the exploiteur racket, which Wood had not quite become an out-and-out exploiteur at this point. His movies like this don't have any nudity. It does discuss a rather, what you may call a trashy tabloid subject of the era, because it was the Christine Jorgensen sex change, but it's relatively... Now here we have Ed Wood here making his cinematic appearance. This was his first finished film, although he had appeared in commercials up until now. And as you can see, he wanted a wig that didn't fully cover his manly features, because he wanted to show that he was in fact a man in women's clothing. But as you can see, he actually looks pretty good as a woman in some of these scenes. He's used to doing it, more or less. He's kind of tall, statuesque. Here we see a number of headlines, which may or may not have been and then followed by the excessive stock footage of Edward D. Wood films that he is known for. This is something which I think is somewhat tragic and distracting, that he felt the need to insert so many stock clips into his otherwise, fine originally produced features, in which case it actually makes Glen or Glenda feel a little long when you see all these excessive cutaways, because there's so much unique original material that you want to get to that you don't really want to see all these shots of cars driving and everything, and there's so many nice little clips in and around between them. This film is funny too. It's kind of like, it features some of Ed Wood's comedy, like intentional or unintentional. It's all there. And you hold up the headlines, and the way Wood does the headlines and reactions is actually more fun than a lot of other movies previously did the headlines and reactions, because sometimes they lingered on a shot too long, so that because you were supposed to be able to read all of it. Sometimes they didn't linger enough. Other times you couldn't make out what you're looking at. So Wood did some really interesting shots, like here with the ears, talking about what everyone is hearing, seeing, and listening to. Now we have another stupid ad from this channel, so we're going to try to skip that over. So there's a certain film reviewer that I think compared him to one of the more respected, was it Louis Buñuel or something, whoever was making little art films in France. And of course, we always take a shit on all of our American guys. It's one thing that attracts me to the Ed Wood story, is that he was a largely all-American man despite being a transvestite. And here's a shot that was recreated shot for shot in the Johnny Depp Tim Burton film with Johnny Depp. And Wood, of course, has a monstrously large chin, almost as if he had suffered from cherubism or something. I wonder sometimes if it might have been a side effect of his phleresis, his contraction of roundworms during the war, in which he had contracted roundworms and contracted syphilis and a number of different things which kind of scarred and mutilated his body if he took his clothes off. Although Ed Wood, he's very shapely, Marine. If he took his shirt off, he had kind of a nice build. Here he is with his then girlfriend and on-screen fiance, Dolores Fuller in the role of Barbara. And contrary to what you see in the Johnny Depp biopic, Fuller was very instrumental to the success of Ed Wood's pictures, the production and the success. She provided a lot of the wardrobe, and she was a very fine actress with a very tall build, a well-built woman, above average size, not fat or anything. But some people considered her face to be a little large, and Wood, I think might have been trying to get away from her in order to kind of make himself a more professional producer. I think he didn't want his personal life so much involved in making movies. That on top of the fact that, she's a blonde during a time in Hollywood when the brunette was largely ruling house, and there was also a film that he did after this called Bride of the Monster, in which he wanted the female lead to probably resemble Lois Lane, who was popular in the Superman comics. And anyway, here he is moving some furniture around. I guess that's what Glen does for a living. And, no, this is a clip of a different transvestite who is working hard all day. And then this is the funny part of Edward D. Wood's film, is that he kind of makes us imagine that almost every other man in the world is quietly becoming a transvestite at home. So, like, this guy is moving pianos or something, and he comes down to relax, and he can't relax because he's wearing a man's socks, a man's hat, a man's tuxedo, and none of these clothing, all this clothing is comfortable. He's blaming the constriction of the hat for, cutting off the circulation to his head and making him bald, which, I almost never wear a hat, and I am bald, so I know that not to be the case. And then, this is where my mom got real offended, because look how spoiled you are, modern woman, with all these beautiful negligees, hats that don't crump the hair, and silk that fits smoothly on the skin, and all these things that are designed for you. So this is kind of like one of those hilarious moments from Ed Wood. And I really like this scene. Ed Wood doesn't have a lot of people of color in his movies, so here you have an African tribal sequence with the man with the little horns and everything, and they're dancing and they're adorned, and Ed Wood is appropriately pointing out that in tribal civilizations, it's the man who adorns himself with the gaudy jewelry or whatnot, and there's some little skulls in the background which are interesting to me, because in Japan, when he was overseas, they would kind of decorate outside of their tents with these little skulls. I don't know, they must have been real, that they had found on the battlefield, and they'd make little horror signs outside their bunks, with little jokes on them, inscribed Tearaway Recruiting Station, with a little skull on the top, meaning that you're all going to die when you go volunteer for the war over in Tearaway. Now, isn't that interesting? We don't know exactly who made these signs, but I'd like to think that Ed Wood might have had an early part in some of that. Now here we see a man looking at paper, and then when he pulls the paper down, he's a transvestite with a beard. And that's something that I had almost never seen before among the drag queen community. Usually they're the first to shave, So nowadays that doesn't look much too different from a regular metrosexual, as I call them, because a lot of men have their ears pierced and are kind of different looking by today's standards. Now here is Ed Wood. Ed Wood had a compulsive fetish to dress in women's clothing. So he's looking at these women's undergarments from outside, and he's feeling an itch, and he's rubbing his hands, and he's a really great actor for someone who didn't have a lot of... I think he did have theater experience, but this is one of his first times. It's not even his first time on camera, but it's his first main production, a first theatrical film. And I can't get enough of Ed Wood's acting. I think he's a brilliant actor, and I would love to have seen more of him. And there are some other films. He's starred in about at least three or four films, and then he makes what is called a Hitchcockian cameo. Now, this is him. This is depicting his early life, which may or may not be exactly as it was, where he was largely dressed in women's clothing by his mother. And look at those calves. He was a very strong man. Sometimes he got into little fights here and there, except when he was drunk. He couldn't much defend himself. But here he's having the issues with his family, which may or may not have exactly happened just as we see them here today. But this is Wood's reason and explanation for why he was a transvestite, was because his mother had always wanted a girl, and that she used to dress him in girly clothing as a young man. This was also a tradition in different areas of New York where women were in the habit of dressing their infant toddlers in women's clothing, even if they were boys. And that was kind of how Franklin Delano Roosevelt was when he was a young child. He was dressed in girly clothing, just as my dad, who comes from New York, was also dressed in girly clothing. And he comes from a generation that's obviously a little bit younger than Ed Wood. I can't hear the dialogue, so I don't know what these two women are talking about, whether or not that matters. But oh yeah, this one is a depiction of his sister. I think Wood had at least one or more sisters, and also a little brother at some point. Who he kind of didn't talk much to later in life. I don't know if there was a big falling out that they had between each other, but here he's depicting a lot of drama between him and his sister, a lot of drama and stress between him and his sister. So I wonder if this was a real life issue where Wood's sister may have taken exception to him dressing in women's clothing, or particularly her clothing. And right here, just look at Wood. He's just a very dynamic, good-looking man. And at the time, here we have some more stock footage, and Wood likes to have you imagine. Could you imagine that this man rubbing off these, telephone poles and everything, that he wears women's clothing when he gets home at night? And he's going to show a variety of transvestites. I suppose many of them are real transvestites. And then he's got, this is where I think that Wood did have a sense of humor, because he's got this judge scene and all these women talking about reasons why they divorced their husbands because they were wearing their clothing. And Wood at this point had never been married before, so I don't know if this is just how he actually viewed the world or would imagine it, or if he was just trying to be funny. But this is a very hilarious scene. It's one of those unappreciated things. And author Joe Blevins recently did an article on on his Ed Wood Wednesdays blog, where he discussed the influence of Glen or Glenda on a popular Woody Allen film called Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex and Were Afraid to Ask. So now, when we talk about the more artistic aspects of Glen or Glenda, we get into the issue of Glen's character and how he feels as a woman. Like sometimes, or as he feels when he puts on the women's clothes, like sometimes he can't be as brave or as strong until he dresses up like a woman. And there's scenes and sequences later on when we get into the nightmare sequences, which are among some of the most imaginative things that Wood has ever produced. This film is very well done from a shot and screen scenario and story content and variety. Wood has a lot of variety in his films, and things to talk about, famous quotes to repeat, humor that you'd like to shock your friends with, and something like, if you ever wanted to, not everyone likes old black and white movies, but if I was going to invite a bunch of friends over to watch a black and white movie, it'd probably be an Ed Wood film, because there's just a lot to think and talk about, and things that people would never imagine to have existed in the 1950s because of their view of the 1950s. People have this idea that women were oppressed and all this. To some extent, like I said, the men and women had different relations, but a lot of modern things were being developed for the comfort of the modern family and individual, and all this new stuff like single life and trying to figure out how to get your marriage in order and everything. That was a great shot of Wood being distressed, and he shows his distress very well. And here he is groping the Angora sweater. This was one of Edward D. Wood Jr.'s specific fetishes. Now, he could dress in almost any manner of women's clothing that he felt right, but the touch and feel of Angora is apparently what set him off, and something he often wrote about in his films, in his novels, in addition to his film scripts. So now we're seeing a stupid trailer for Marvel that we don't want to watch. And here he's explaining to Barbara, let's try to read the dialogue, uh, why he's keeping maybe a secret and that he can't tell her yet. And he's wondering when to break the news about how he's a transvestite. And Wood just made a nice little cigarette circle in the air. I like it when they do that. That's one of my favorite smoking tricks. And like I said, I'm just going over the action, and haven't been paying attention to a lot of the dialogue because there's so much to discuss with regards to Ed Wood. But I'm really having a good time watching this and talking about both of them. So right now, Wood is afraid to tell her about his transvestism because he's afraid that she's going to get shocked and leave him, which is actually what happened to him at least 2 or 3 times in his adult life. On top of the fact that he wasn't the most faithful boyfriend or husband, and he usually had one girl around the corner, and he frequently congregated around strip clubs and so forth. Here's that famous shot of Buffalo. Pull the strings! Pull the strings! Yeah, that's recreated in the Johnny Depp movie. Wood, like I said, not the best guy in the world. He may or may not have had at least one daughter out of wedlock. And I think, Dolores Fuller herself was already being engaged to another man. I think she was married to another man when Ed Wood came in and swept her away. Because if you didn't notice, he's a very good-looking man who Gregory Walcott described as looking somewhat like Errol Flynn. And he took Dolores from her husband, and she left her husband to go with him. And then Dolores found out about the transvestism, but she also got jilted as a result of the fact that he gave her part to someone else in the production of one of his next movies called Bride of the Monster. And it was a part that he had promised her, and she had done pin-up shoots where she posed with Bela Lugosi, and she was a really good, had a really great distinctive appearance, and I think she could have been a wonderful star. Right now we see a clip going over one of the old clips from earlier. So Wood isn't opposed to repeating different footage. He started at the same point earlier on in the film, and now he's come back to it, which is a rather bold cinematic move that we don't always see in a lot of older movies, starting the film here and then returning to the same spot after so much time and sequences have elapsed. So here Wood is pretending to pick up a garment for his girlfriend until he's gonna start fondling the item himself, and the teller is gonna notice him linger on it too long and look at him like, oh my God, And I don't know if this is based on how he thinks people would react to him, or the way they actually did, but apparently he thinks that just by touching it this way, he's giving himself away as a transvestite. And she does this really great look. Oh my. Yeah. Now we're back to the thunder and the lightning, which introduces Bela Lugosi's character. Like I said, you could have produced this film almost without Lugosi's character, but I'm glad it's still in here because it's just such a nice role and such a great performance. And we could have done a little less with these cars and all this shot of this American industry in the 1950s. This was a pretty good idea for the Ed Wood film. He's proud of America. This is he's pitching this film and this idea to mainline America, and he's showing everyone in their day-to-day work, maybe sometimes contemplating the serious issues of the day, which is not a conversation we normally have. So here are 2 guys, as I recall. I think this is the scene with the 2 guys that are talking about a transvestite, and one is oblivious that the other one actually is a transvestite, and they're just talking like 2 guys talking about something of the day, and until they go on their separate ways, and the one of them is a transvestite behind closed doors, and sometimes that does happen. Although this happens a lot more in the Ed Wood film than you would have ever imagined, and seeing it in real life, So we get this great shot of the steel mill, which another thing I like about Glen or Glenda is that these are better uses of stock. this is more quality film stock than what he usually loops around in his films. And apparently there was a rule where like a motion picture film had to be a certain length. So he's using this stock footage to largely pad the length of his feature film so that it runs at least 60 minutes. And I'm actually running out of things to talk about at this point because I think I've discussed them all, and I've just had fun watching the movie progress with all of the dialogue, and I don't know where to cut off or where to continue because I was surprised that I could find so much to riff off of. This would now be a great time if I had someone else doing this with me to ask a few questions about what I've already gone over and try to answer them. I'm trying to think and imagine what my friend D might ask if he was watching this with me, because he would be the best to chime in.